Hello everyone, I'm Lao Xiaoli. There are three members of our team are Yanzhen Liang, Chen Wenhao, and me. The topic we discuss is case study. Next, I will share the purpose and characteristics of the case study. Part 1. The empirical method can solve the problem of how to rise from experience to theory, and the emphasis of the empirical method is to verify the hypothesis. But in the scientific research, hypothesis rising is crucial. The hypothesis rising is not completely and inductively process, nor is purely or deductive process, such as dividing the scientific discovery into two stages of hypothesis making and hypothesis verification. The previous stage is very difficult. It should be said that the originality of scientific theory originated from the first stage, and the verification of hypothesis is in many cases a relatively procedural process. There is no doubt that the proposition of hypothesis requires some methodological guidance, and the case study is just available for theoretical presentation. So the case study is different from the empirical research method at this point. An empirical research can solve the problem of how to rise from experience to theory, and the case study in social science can essentially test the hypothesis. As the case study itself, the sample size of the case study is generally small, mainly obtained by convenient sampling. Because the source of the data is not controlled by the researcher, it's difficult to verify the conclusions of the study repeatedly. So it is held that the case study to falsify or social science hypothesis can in fact be recognized by academic peers. The main purpose of the case study is to construct the theory. Its essence also lies in the theory construction, and the confirmatory case study even exists is in the extremely secondary position. Part 2. Characteristics of the case study. Number 1. Case study need to not begin with theoretical assumptions. The most basic components of theory are concepts and variables, and propositions and assertions are based on concepts and variables. A concept is an expression and indication of a single object or entity. It is abstract, universal, and unobservable. It reflects the essential attribute of things and phenomena that become themselves and distinguish them from others. A variable is an operationalization or transformation of a concept so that the original abstract concept can be observed and measured. A proposition relates to the relationship between these abstract concepts, how these concepts are connected. The observation goes further, that is, express the broad relationship involved in the proposition in a more concrete and operational manner, and therefore assumes that it must be composed of specific variables. Because the purpose of the case study is to follow a theory, it is clear that the case study does not have to put forward a clear hypothesis before the study. Because of the significant role of induction information theory, case studies can start entirely from empirical observation, not from theoretical observations. Case study can also start from broader propositions rather than from hypotheses made up of specific variables. And if they must start with theoretical observations, they may limit the range of empiricity inductions by researchers and reduce the quality of the theory that the case studies ultimately follow. Number 2. Principles of theoretical sampling for case study. Empirical research requires a formal research program that includes several cleaner observations, rigorous sampling method, and normative verification method that can be fully done in case study. First, most of the case study do not clear the scientific observations. Second, in case study, limit to quantity. No matter how pre-standardized, the final screening of large study case will not meet any statistical criteria in order to follow the aim of theory. Most case studies are done the mass of the theoretical sampling. There is a big difference between theoretical sampling and statistical sampling. Theoretical sampling is in process of case study according to the need of forming theory. Subjective selection of the next step to study the case. Theoretical sampling can only be carried out in the case study process. It is not predetermined. Case studies generally do not require standardized verification methods. It is well known that the standard verification method should be based on the standard sampling method as the premise. The case study used theoretical sampling verification is temporarily within the scope of theoretical sampling verification, so it is clear that the verification of the so-called triangle or more angles is of little significance. Number 3, the process of case study exploration is an iterative combination of subjective interpretation and objective measurement. An important feature of subjective interpretation and objective measurement is that subjective interpretation and objective measure are not completed at one time as empirical research. It is a process of repeated verification, repeated refining, and if circumstances permit, the case of the next secondary study should be determined in the case study according to the results of each temporary verification, which is the theoretical sampling in the case study. Number 4, the presentation of the case study is a recording of the whole practical research process. Writing case study is one of the most challenging links in case study. There are many as 6 alternative ways to write case study: linear analysis, comparison, chronological order, theoretical construction, inversion, and structure. That's all. Thank you.